for Cook Inlet Tribal Council's Victim Services Department. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So today we're going to be talking about human trafficking um, and kind of just going over some of the basics. Before we get started, obviously we're going to be discussing human trafficking, which is kind of a heavy topic and can be distressing or even triggering. So please take care of yourself during this hour. If you need to step out or end your time on Zoom, it will not offend me. Do what you need to do to be safe in your own body. Here's kind of what we're going to be diving into today. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define human trafficking. We'll go over some common myths about human trafficking. We'll talk about some different labels, and then we'll talk about the AMP model. We'll go through some recruitment tactics, talk about risk factors, recognizing the signs, what you can do, and then what CITC's Victim Services Department can do. Okay, so what is human trafficking? So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or the TVPA, really kind of defined human trafficking for the first time. And they defined it as a crime involving the exploitation of a person for the purpose of compelled labor or commercial sex act through force, fraud, or coercion. Um, and so it's important to note that we define a commercial sex act is giving or receiving the giving or receiving of sex or sex acts in exchange for compensation. And so for this, compensation is defined as anything of value. So that can include drugs, food, shelter, phones, or protection. The TVPA also defines human trafficking into two types of trafficking: labor trafficking and sex trafficking. The definition of labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, or for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. The three important words when you're talking about trafficking, a lot of times you'll see, I will repeat them a lot of times in this training, it's force, fraud, or coercion. Those are kind of the three things that make something to be legally considered trafficking. And then for sex trafficking, I took this definition actually from the 2025 annual report from the Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. And it says that sex trafficking is is when a person is required to engage in a commercial sex act as the result of force, threats of force, fraud, coercion, or any combination of such means, or when a person is under the age of 18 is caused to engage in commercial sex, that person is a victim of sex trafficking. This is true even when the victim previously consented to engage in commercial sex. So again, the difference between somebody who is someone over the age of 18 that is voluntarily engaging in commercial sex and sex trafficking is that force, fraud, and coercion piece. Now we're going to kind of dive in and talk very, very briefly about consent, because in the scope of Alaska, consent laws are really confusing. And so STAR, Stand Together Against Rape, which is another awesome agency in Alaska, put together this infographic that I really dig that kind of dives into the age of consent. So the age of consent generally in Alaska is 16. There are some caveats to that. As mentioned in the infographic, a caveat is if the person or partner is in a position of authority, which is like a babysitter, coach, teacher, supervisor, mentor, any sort of position of perceived authority, and is more than 3 years older, then consent cannot be given. A special note about trafficking is even if the person is over the age of 16, if they are under the age of 18 and they're engaging in commercial sex, or have been recruited into commercial sex in any way, that is still considered trafficking under the law. So it's a little confusing, that caveat. And I included this quote that's a little wordy, but it does kind of define that a little bit easier. So it says US law explicitly includes a distinct definition of sex trafficking of children, any child under the age of 18 who has been recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, provided, obtained, advertised, maintained, patronized, or solicited to engage in a commercial sex act is a victim of human trafficking, whether or not there is force involved. So like I mentioned before, those three words, force, fraud, or coercion, do not need to be proven for a minor, so anyone under the age of 18, for it to be considered trafficking. Yeah, so now we're going to be talking about some myths versus fact. There's a lot of misinformation about trafficking, and so we're just going to clear a couple of those up, and then we'll dive into the AMP model. Also, I can't access the chat, but if I'm talking too fast, Sabrina, let me know. I tend to do that. So just hit me up. Okay, so human trafficking involves the movement or transportation of a person across state and national borders. So this is a myth. Oh, geez, I thought it would go. Maybe I need to go this way. There we go. That is a myth. So human trafficking is often confused with human smuggling, which does require the transportation across a state or a national line. A good way to think of it is that smuggling is a crime against the state, and human trafficking is a crime against a person. So if somebody is being trafficked, they can also be forced to move across state lines, but it's not a prerequisite or a requirement for it to be considered human trafficking. The other one is, also if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section. The next one is all human trafficking involves sex abuse. This one is also a myth. While sex abuse is often a large part of human trafficking, it is not always required, or it is not required for it to be considered human trafficking for sex abuse to be a prerequisite. And a lot of times human trafficking can involve sex abuse, but a lot of times it also doesn't. So it just depends on the circumstances. The third one is abduction is a common feature of trafficking, especially for children. This is also a myth. This comes from a lot of mainstream media where you see trafficking as somebody getting taken in a van on a street or from the movie Taken. And while abduction does happen, we see a lot of more personable recruitment methods before we see abduction. So it does happen, but it would not be considered a common feature of trafficking. A lot of trafficking survivors or people who are experiencing trafficking know the person. It is not often a stranger. So then the last one is men make up a significant portion of human trafficking victims. That is a fact, especially when it comes to labor trafficking. The statistics, I believe, are 60% of charged labor trafficking survivors are men. And there is unfortunately not a lot of statistics regarding the men involved in sex trafficking, but we can assume that that number is pretty underreported. Okay, now we're going to talk about the AMP model. AMP stands for action, means, and purpose. So we think about the AMP model as a kind of a recipe to define human trafficking to make it a little bit more easy to understand. And so the action refers to how a trafficker gets in contact with a victim. So this is kind of that laundry list that I brought up in the definition portion. So it's recruiting, harboring, transporting, obtaining, advertising, or soliciting. So again, that goes for the how. The means are my three favorite words: force, fraud, and coercion. Something important to note, again, is that if the victim is under the age of 18, you do not need force, fraud, or coercion for it to be considered trafficking. And then the purpose, again, commercial sex or labor exploitation. So we're kind of going to dive into all three of those pieces a little bit easier to make them a little bit easier to understand. So the first one, action. So again, that refers to how the trafficker creates a relationship with a person for the purpose of exploitation. So something important to note is the most useful recruitment tactic is to meet a person's unmet need. So a lot of times This can look like um, seduction or coercion if an individual, sorry, hold on, I lost my train of thought. Seduction or coercion. So this could be something where two people start engaging in a romantic relationship, and then partner A starts asking partner B to engage in sex acts. And if they don't, there is a level of force, fraud, or coercion involved. That would be considered trafficking. Posting false job advertisements. We see this a lot in labor trafficking cases, where a job is posted, somebody takes a job, and then when the job is actually done, it doesn't reflect as levels as um, parts of exploitation as a part of it, and it doesn't reflect the actual job that was originally posted. The use of peers and social media is also uh, getting more and more popular as we're kind of getting more and more into social media. And that's a piece that we definitely need a lot more data on. And then the smallest one that we see is this violence and kidnapping piece. So that's kind of like the abduction piece, the things that you would see in popularized media. Um, but yeah. So when we're talking about recruitment, data shows that um, in tried sex trafficking cases, about 60%, or I'm sorry, about 62% of sex trafficking victims are recruited online. Some popular methods that we have seen recently have been um, the use of anonymous chat rooms in online platforms such as Roblox or Minecraft, Snapchat, Instagram, kind of anywhere where somebody can be anonymous online talking to um, other people, and they don't have to verify like age or anything like that. In 2020, data showed that in sex trafficking cases, 43% of survivors knew their trafficker prior to being trafficked, and in labor trafficking cases, it was 57. And like I said before, in the terms of false promises and advertising, of the new forced labor cases in 2021, 100% of the victims were recruited through a fraudulent job offer. And then I also included in here just some recent headlines that have been making in the Anchorage Daily News that kind of involve social media and or online anonymous chat rooms. We're seeing that kind of more and more because they're not super regulated. Okay, now we're going to jump into the means. So like I said before, force, fraud, and coercion. Force refers to what you would think word force refers to. So it could be physical restraints, physical harm, sexual assault, the restricting of contact for friends and family. It could also include preventing somebody from going to work, restricting someone's access to healthcare. It could also be the threat of force or violence to a person or a family member of a person. Um, Fraud refers to false promises regarding employment, wages, and working conditions, any sort of false advertising, the promise of a better life, sometimes involving travel, and the withholding of wages. We see a lot of fraud in labor trafficking cases. And actually, in the next slide, we're going to go over kind of an example of labor trafficking so that this can make a little bit clearer sense. And then the third one, coercion, threat of contacting immigration services or the police regarding a criminal act, the usage of blackmail, debt bondage, the confiscation of personal documents such as social security cards, IDs, immigration paperwork, or passports, and psychological manipulation. So something important to note is debt bondage is a tactic we see again a lot in labor trafficking cases. And this is where an individual incurs a debt and then the debt gets larger at a rate that is unable to pay. And then the person is unable to leave due to the amount of debt or perceived debt. So we're going to jump into a quick example. Okay, I'm going to read this, so don't feel overwhelmed by the amount of words on this slide. But it says, Steve learns about a fishing job while staying at a homeless shelter in Anchorage. The job comes with temporary housing and is well paid. He is told by the recruiter that it costs $5,000 for transportation to the port and appropriate fishing gear, but it is easily paid off, and most people borrow the money from the captain. When he arrives at the job, he is told that he will be working off his debt and won't be paid until after the fishing season. Once the fishing season has begun, the boat engages in sea transshipment, meaning that the boat and crew resupply while still at sea, limiting his access to resources and delaying port inspections. In the middle of the season, his captain begins to charge him for extras, including cigarettes and food, which increases debt at a rate that is difficult to pay back. If he leaves, he will have no way to pay back the money he borrowed. The captain tells him he will be blacklisted from working in the fishing industry again. Although there is no official blacklist, Steve knows that his captain is well connected within the industry, and he feels he has no choice but to stay and try and pay off his debt. So in this scenario, Steve was recruited via a false job advertisement. He was also recruited out of a homeless shelter, which in this case means that he had this unmet need of stable housing, which the job met by providing housing as well as pay. So the force, fraud, and coercion in this would be fraud and debt bondage, which is a form of coercion, because Steve incurred his first level of debt and then had more and more debt and was unable to pay off. He was also unable to get off of the ship, and he had restricted contact with anybody. And so the purpose in this would be labor trafficking. Unfortunately, this is something we do see. There was a fishing company that was tied up in a labor trafficking case a couple of years ago. And that same fishing company was recruiting people out of homeless shelters. So this is an example that is just an example, but it is reflective of something that we see pretty regularly. And yeah. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Okay, now we're going to go over a sex trafficking example that has to do with kind of this relational part of sex trafficking that can be a part of it. Anyway, so sex trafficking. Again, I'm going to read it, so don't feel like you have to. Abby meets a man at a party, and afterward, he follows her on social media and sends her a DM. He is everything that she has dreamed of. He's kind, compassionate, and very supportive. Abby falls deeply in love with him and believes she has found the one. However, money is tight, and one night he takes her to a party and tells her to engage in sex acts with his friends in order to help them pay the rent. He makes it seem like no big deal at first, so she does it. He keeps all of the money that he earns and tells her it is being used for her expenses. Sometimes he hits her to help her understand how much he needs for her to contribute. He says he will stop loving her and she will be alone again if she keeps making trouble. At this point, Abby is living with this man, and he is meeting all of her basic needs, and she has lost contact with all of her previous support. So again, the action in this case, so the how is seduction. So they originally met, they formed this relationship, they formed this love bond, and then this man begins to ask Abby to commit or to engage in sex acts that are being paid. So that's an exchanging of sex acts for a good. In this case, the good is money, to which she does not get to keep. It goes straight to him, and he says that he's using it to pay for her living expenses, but who knows if that is true. And then if she does not do it, there's this level of force as well as coercion because she doesn't have access to any of her previous support, and there is a level of isolation, and the purpose being sex trafficking. Kind of an example of that. And then, so risk factors. So when you're thinking about who may be vulnerable to sex trafficking or to trafficking in general, it's important to think about trafficking and that it does not exist in a vacuum, and that is often the end result of a range of other persistent injustices and inequities. And again, traffickers often start engaging with potential victims by meeting an unmet need, such as housing, drugs, food, income, love, etc. So some populations that may be a little bit more vulnerable to this are populations of people who have relocated from a rural area to a more urban area, individuals with high ACEs score, so that's a high adverse childhood experiences score, individuals a part of the LGBTQA plus community, anywhere there's a high population of transient males, anyone that has an unstable housing or an unstable adult support. The 2025 Council on Human Trafficking, which is a really awesome council made up of survivors that are currently working in the anti-trafficking industry, who are awesome, just came out with their 2025 annual report. And within that report, they talk about root causes. And I pulled this quote from that this morning that I think is, a good way to look at when you're thinking about risk factors or root causes to trafficking. It says, there is no single root cause for exploitation. Recognizing the diverse harm and resiliency factors individuals and families may experience and be exposed to is crucial for informing the community and enhancing prevention efforts. This understanding can also ensure that programs continually evolve to meet the needs of survivors. And that kind of emphasizes that there are a lot of things that go into every survivor's story, and it's not just one thing. So it's not just that there's a relocation, or it's not just that they're LGBTQA, it's all of these things kind of together. So what can this look like? So trafficking can kind of, somebody who may be experiencing trafficking, it can look like anything. Some specific signs you may notice is an isolation from friends and family, unstable or inconsistent living situation, an intense concern about owing money to a boss or an employer, a loss of a sense of time or location, or intense abrasive and or inappropriate communication patterns. Some barriers to identification. So a lot of times individuals who potentially are being trafficked don't always see themselves as victims. Trafficking is a really scary word, and it's also a legal term. And so they may not recognize that what they're experiencing is trafficking. They may recognize it as abuse. They may recognize it as just a bad day, even. It just kind of depends on the situation. Their experiences may also have elements of criminality, which cause them to not want to be identified. There is an intense fear of law enforcement, a lack of knowledge of resources, and then there's also, most importantly, intense methods of control or manipulation. Something to note is that Alaska poses a unique environment given the movement of people from rural villages to urban areas like Anchorage. Some people will come here or come to Anchorage from a more rural area and not have the same level of support, and then not know kind of the resources or how to access them. So what can you do about that? The most important thing that you can do is listen to survivors, and provide a safe space for survivors to share their experiences and understand that survivors are experts in their own experiences and provide unconditional respect and safe behaviors. So if someone is telling you their story, believe them and allow them to tell it in the way that they want to tell it. Another really awesome thing you can do involves education and communication. In the trafficking sphere, there's a lot of verbiage about rescuing and saving, and fixing, and a lot of times that verbiage can be really harmful because it decenters a person's autonomy and their strength and their resilience. And so having difficult conversations with your community about warning signs and also about bias can be really helpful. And then some reporting resources, if you think someone's in immediate danger, call 911. This is also the human trafficking hotline, which you can call. And then if you don't want to call, you can also text help or info to the shorter number, and they'll connect you with someone that can help. I'm including another quote from the annual report that I pulled this morning that I really think highlights kind of this resiliency piece. And it says, a mentor once told me, we fix things, not people. People are not broken. They do not need to be repaired. They may suffer harm and they may carry wounds, but what they truly need is time, compassion, and real access to healing resources. Campaigns that reduce survivors to helpless victims in need of rescue are not only misguided, but also echo the very tactics of control used by traffickers themselves. Organizations committed to genuine change must break this harmful narrative and instead uplift the strength, resilience, and unique journeys of survivors. To keep profiting from stories that frame us as dependent is to participate in our exploitation, not end it. If you truly want to make a difference, do not perpetuate the problem, honor the power, our agency, and the capacity to heal. I thought that that was really important because I think it emphasizes kind of centering a survivor in their own story, as well as, even if it is well intentioned, moving away from this rescue language because it is harmful. Yeah. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my agency and what we do. And then I am leaving kind of a lot of time for questions because I understand that trafficking is a little complicated and a lot of times people have a lot of questions. So I want to make sure I create space and time for that. So CITC's Victim Services, previously we were the Alaska Native Justice Center. We recently merged with CITC, which we were always kind of a part of, but we're now streamlining that in order to increase our access or increase participants' access to our services. And so what we can offer first and foremost is case management. And our case management looks like emotional support and safety planning, assistance with writing protective orders, education about the criminal justice system, court accompaniment, assistance applying to the VCCB. And then we have referrals and services and resources to things like housing, healthcare, behavioral health. On top of that, we have a really legal focused scope of work. And so we have a really robust legal team that helps represent individuals who have experienced harm in primarily family law cases. So we have attorneys that can represent participants in domestic violence protective order cases, which one of our paralegals will be joining us tomorrow. She's amazing. She'll kind of walk us through that a little bit more. And that's at no cost to the participant. We also offer legal consultations regarding family law matters such as divorce and custody. And then we have a really awesome education and outreach team that engages in community partners in regular outreach and community events, and also provides comprehensive training on domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking. And this is our contact information. And I believe Sabrina just put our link to our website as well. But yeah, that's a lot of information in a really short amount of time. And I am able to provide the slides to anybody that would like them. I know it's also recorded on Facebook, but yeah.
Thank you, Delaney. This is great, and I appreciate you taking your time to be here. And I know some people are on lunch, but before you leave, can you do the post survey? Sabrina will put it in the chat now. Thank you, guys. Please don't forget to do the survey.
I actually have a question, Delaney.
Yeah.
And so I like that you included examples of like what we've recently seen locally to do with teenagers. And then you posted, like where recruitment can often happen. Do you have any tips? Like I have a teenager and I've been very careful about including him into social media, but do you have any tips for parents of teens?
Well, I am not a parent of teen, so take anything I say with a grain of salt because I do not have children of my own. But I think just in general, any access to anonymous chat rooms or anonymous ways that people can engage, it's really hard in social media specifically because um, you can make an Instagram profile for like you can easily change your information and pose as somebody that you're not. And so I think any kind of like internet safety conversation can be really helpful into like how to make sure that the information that you're providing on the internet is safe, and also how to tell when somebody is maybe not being super truthful about their identity. Like nobody should be asking you for like any of your identifying information if you're anonymously chatting with someone and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just another reminder to do the survey before you leave. And then if you have questions, there's a Q&A box.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.